Malcolm X is amongst the most influential African Americans in history, if not one of the most influential Americans, period. Born within a notorious period of racism, Malcolm's harsh childhood moulded him into an angry, opinionated force of nature, who stirred the emotions of thousands with his indictment of the white Western populace. In an astounding journey of life, Malcolm X was almost always in a state of transformation. His greatest change came when he performed the pillar of Hajj. Such was the impact of the pilgrimage upon his life that he abandoned the heretical doctrine of the Nation of Islam, submitting to the Sunnah of Islam, in belief and in practice. He also dropped his racist views, instead understanding the unity of man when under the submission of Allah. Born on May 19, 1925 in the town of Omaha, Nebraska, Malcolm was the fourth of 7 children, of which all grew up in a household that celebrated Black pride, and were immersed in the Pan-African movement. Inspired by the teachings of Marcus Garvey, he and his family developed a strong conviction of rectifying the affairs of the impoverished African-American people.
Malcolm's father was a Garveyite. He believed in the principles of Marcus Garvey, who believed in a return to Africa for blacks who were living in America, who had come to America as slaves. He believed that they should return back. But Malcolm very early on learned about the violence of the United States of America. He learned very early that black people were not accepted. He learned that to be a quote-unquote uppity black man, to be a black man like his father was, outspoken against racism, outspoken for the concerns and needs of his congregation, meant that you would be put into the path of violence.
Malcolm grew further apart from his Caucasian neighbours after the death of his father Earl, who was knocked down by a streetcar. It was suggested that the death was a deliberate act of the white supremacist organisation, the Black Legion. Malcolm's childhood hit further tragedy when his mother Louise fell into a nervous breakdown when unable to cope with the difficulties of raising a large family.
His mother really didn't cope once her husband had been killed, which I think in a way reinforces the notion that Mr. Little in fact had been lynched and not just run over, which is what some people would like us believe.
She had a whole family to sort of raise. She was then put into an asylum and the family was split up.
And so growing up as an orphan, so to speak, on the state actually is a traumatic experience for many people. But we also recognize that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was an orphan himself. So orphans have a type of sensitivity and they're very focused people because they don't necessarily take things for granted. They don't have their parents around them. And so it gives them a type of consciousness. Their eyes are wide open and they're able to accomplish in many cases more than people who have parents who are waiting for everything to be done and they're spoon-fed. So Malcolm was not spoon-fed. He had to deal with reality from a young age.
Malcolm excelled in junior high school, but became disillusioned when a teacher put down his chances of being a successfully educated black man.
He goes to a school that is largely a white school and excels against all odds. And yet when he goes to his favorite teacher and he speaks to his favorite teacher, and his teacher asks him, well, Malcolm, you're doing so well. You know, what kind of career have you thought for yourself? And Malcolm says in his autobiography that, you know, I responded really without thinking, but I thought, you know, I would like to become a lawyer. And his teacher dissuades him.
If you want to be what you've written, Malcolm, as your goal, you want to be a lawyer, well, that's not a realistic goal for a Negro. And you have to be realistic. You're a Negro. Maybe you could become a carpenter.
That is the childhood of Malcolm X. I mean, you see this bright young man from a broken home. His father has been murdered. His family has been torn apart by violence and by the authorities. Excels in school, yet turns in his late teens and early 20s to petty crime. It's a remarkable transformation, but it is a transformation that is emblematic of racist America in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even to the 60s.
Over time, he became involved in various crimes, and at the age of 20 was sentenced to 8 to 10 years for breaking and entering.
Malcolm goes through his life, and he goes, why am I in jail? A white man put me in here. Why did I become a hustler? Because a white man told me that I couldn't become a lawyer. Who killed my father? White people. So he kind of sees an illogical connection, which on the face of it seems quite natural. White people are the cause of his problems.
And in many cases, and this is what was happening in the big cities in the United States, is that African Americans were forced to be involved in crime, in hustling, in order to gain a living, because the normal job type situation was very restricted. And so you find that most African Americans, the highest level they're reaching is working on railroads and as servants or porters. So you're never able to really gain that much out of the time that you put in. And so the hustler, the pimp, the drug dealer, the one who's taking the numbers, who's involved in crime and robbing people's houses and whatever, that person can gain a lot of wealth in a short period of time.
During his sentence, Malcolm became a member of the Nation of Islam, and after his release in '52, became one of their prominent members. He was instrumental in spreading their ideals of black supremacy, shunning the integration aims of the civil rights movement.
What makes the so-called Negro unable to stand on his own 2 feet? He has no self-confidence. He has no proud confidence in his own race, because the white man destroyed your and my past, destroyed our knowledge of our culture. And by having destroyed it, now we don't know we have any achievements, any accomplishments. And as long as you can be convinced that you never did anything, you can never do anything.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Please. I think you're right in my chair. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society. Even in South Africa, those Africans aren't faced with bayonets and aren't faced with police dogs. I would be not a man. If I was in a position to bring it in front of the United Nations and didn't do so, I wouldn't be a man.
Malcolm, do you intend to lead the charge in the United Nations?
Well, I find that to say you're going to lead something creates a lot of hostility, division, jealousy, and envy. I hope to work with any group of leaders or any group of organizations to do whatever is necessary to see that this problem is brought before the United Nations.
Have you had any commitments from any nations in Africa to support you in such a move?
I would rather not say at this time. But one thing I found in my travels, all of them look upon us as their long-lost brother.
You realize the implication is that you have had such commitments when you say...
This is your interpretation of what I said. One thing that I found in all of my travels was that all of the Africans, not only the Africans, but the Asians and the Muslims, look upon us as their long-lost brothers. And America had actually tricked many of them into a hands-off policy by giving them the impression that she was honestly trying to do something to solve the problem. My argument over there was designed to prove that it is impossible for the United States government to solve the race problem. It's impossible.
Religion has failed. Your leaders, not that religion has failed.
Meeting Elijah Muhammad after he was released from prison was a magnificent spiritual moment for him. Here he was coming, he felt he was coming in the presence of someone who reflected the divine, and he was convinced. And the rapidity with which Malcolm went from being a mere member of the Nation of Islam to a minister in the Nation of Islam, and then the national minister of the Nation of Islam, is a remarkable meteoric rise. Why? Because the Nation of Islam gave him the space that no one else had ever given him. Gave him an opportunity to shine. And he did shine. And he did it as a true believer.
The people in Mississippi, as well as Mississippi, New York, and elsewhere, know that freedom comes to us either by ballots or by bullets. That's the only way freedom is gotten.
However, Malcolm X eventually fell out with the Nation of Islam, rejecting their pseudo-Islamic teachings.
The leader of the Muslims in America Minister Malcolm Shabazz, addressing a public meeting at Manhattan Center in New York City on Sunday, December the 1st, did not speak for the Muslims when he made comments on the death of the President, John F. Kennedy. He was speaking for himself and not Muslims in general. And Minister Malcolm has been suspended from public speaking for the time being.
I've been silent for the past 90 days because of some statements I made concerning the President of the United States, which were distorted. They were distorted. And yes.
What did you say, Malcolm?
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing.
You did not say that you were glad the president was killed.
No, that's what the press said.
And Malcolm X was just basically saying America has gone all around the world and created violence, and now it's coming back. The chicken has come home to roost.
But this disturbed Elijah Muhammad and the leadership, so they didn't agree with this, and they suspended him.
I did receive word from him that the 90-day suspension that I was under was not to be lifted, that it would remain indefinite, and as I...
When did this take place?
This past week. And so I just reached the conclusion that I frankly didn't think that I would ever be an active member of the Nation of Islam anymore.
Within this turbulent period of his life, Malcolm was offered to attend the rites of Hajj, a journey which would have a profound effect upon his mind, body and soul. At the Cairo airport, Malcolm was immediately exposed to the unity of Islam, regardless of the cultural and racial differences existing between pilgrims.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's actually introduced to real Islam, because he was so loyal. If he was not suspended, he probably never would have left. But by the mercy of Allah, he's then suspended, kicked out, and he realizes now that he's really being excommunicated. And so his family members, his sister had embraced real Islam, and there were people who realized that Malcolm, was a sincere person, and so they financed his pilgrimage to Mecca.
Never have I witnessed such sincere hospitality and true brotherhood as is practiced here in this ancient holy land, the home of Abraham, Muhammad, and all the other prophets of the Holy Scriptures. You may be shocked at these words coming from me, but what I have seen has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held, to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. For during the past 11 days, I've eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, slept on the same rug, and prayed to the same God, with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. We are truly the same because their belief in one God has removed the white from their minds, the white from their behavior, and the white from their attitudes. Sincerely, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X.
He's saying that if this religion can transform these people, then it can transform America. If millions of people can come to this place, eat together, live together, break bread together, pray together, and not see the difference between rich and poor, not see the difference between black and white, not see the difference between north and south or east or west.
As Malcolm entered Mecca, nothing could prepare him for the beauty of Masjid al-Haram. Malcolm's experiences in Mecca softened his stance towards the white populace. He saw that racism was not a hereditary condition of any one race, but rather a condition of a flawed society. At the heart of the Islamic world, Malcolm witnessed the essence of Tawheed and how it united people from the most distinct of backgrounds.
Malcolm, have your experiences with white-skinned Muslims in Africa and the Middle East made you feel that relations between Negroes and whites who are not Muslims is any more possible?
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam.
Malcolm's journey to Mecca freed him from the pseudo-religious teachings of Elijah Muhammad and gave him the clarified state in which he understood and embraced real Islam.
My going to Mecca and going into the Muslim world, into the African world, and being recognized and accepted as a Muslim and as a brother may solve the problem for me personally. But I personally feel that my personal problem is never solved as long as the problem is not solved for all of our people in this country. So I remain Malcolm X as long as there is a need to protest and struggle and fight against the injustices that our people are involved in this country.
Combined with his passion for human rights and a desire to rid the plight of the black community in the West, Malcolm's embrace of Orthodox Islam made him a force in the media world, inspiring thousands of people around the world.
Malcolm gives a lecture on Thursday night, and he says to Betty Shabazz, his wife, I want you, even though she's pregnant with twins, I want you to come to this lecture, bring the children. That Thursday night, the lecture that he gives, not well reported, but it will be the last speech before that Sunday in the Audubon Ballroom where Betty and the family come. That's going to be his last speech, in which he says, I am still a Muslim. That only means that I believe that there's only one God, who is Allah, and that I believe in Muhammad, not this Muhammad, but the Muhammad who lived 1400 years ago. And that as a Muslim, that I should pray 5 times a day and give charity from my wealth and fast in the month of Ramadan and to perform the Hajj, which I recently performed. So without a doubt, he is clearly articulating on that Thursday evening all of the principles that we understand universally as being Islam.
Declare our rank on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means.
الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون.
In February 1965, shortly after repudiating the Nation of Islam, he was assassinated by 3 of its own members. His death came as a blow to not just the black community, but to Muslims and human rights activists all over the world. His life serves as a reminder as to how Allah guides whom He wills. The wonders of Hajj made an intelligent figure become a timely legacy of justice, sacrifice and conviction in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
If